Cool. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the launch of a poet season for Wales by Michiel Heyns. My name is Jennifer Malik. I'm the editor of the reading list, and we're joined this evening by Finuala Dowling, who will be chatting to Michiel about the book. I'll just do some introductions. Finuala is an award-winning poet and author from Cape Town. Last year saw the publication of her 5th poetry collection, Pretend You Don't Know Me, and her 5th novel, which is called Okay, 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 which is currently shortlisted for this year's Herman Charles Bosman Award. Finuala works at the Centre for Extramural Studies at the University of Cape Town, where she's currently running an online course on diary writing. So that sounds very interesting. Look that up if you are an aspiring creative writer. And I suppose at the moment very relevant with, you know, the plague diaries and all the selling out.
Yeah, everyone's under lockdown.
And then the author we are celebrating this evening is Michiel Heyns. Michiel is an award-winning author and translator. For much of his life, he was an academic and was Professor of English at Stellenbosch University, and I think Professor Emeritus at the moment. After the publication of his first novel, The Children's Day, he took to writing full-time and has produced a number of novels since then. His novels have won the Herman Charles Bosman Award for English fiction 3 times, and he's also won the prestigious Sunday Times Fiction Prize, as well as numerous awards for his literary translations. We're here this evening to celebrate his most recent novel, A Poet Season for Wales, which was published in March, I believe.
I've lost track of time, but I think it was it was just a week after the lockdown. Let's put it that way.
The book is a gripping psychological drama set in Hermanus, and of course features a touch of Michiel's biting humour. We'd like to thank Jonathan Bull Publishers for co-hosting the event with us this evening. All the books I've mentioned are available as ebooks on Amazon, Kobo, or wherever you get your ebooks. So if you're watching from overseas, make sure you download a copy. And if you're just not venturing out in South Africa, you can also get the ebook. And I think it's also currently on special on Amazon and Kobo, which is a good deal. If you prefer paper, you can venture out to your nearest bookshop or support your local indie bookshop and pick up a copy there. Or, of course, you can order it online, as we're all experts in doing now, after not being able to do anything else for the last few months. Please leave your questions for Michiel in the comments section on YouTube or Facebook where you're watching this video. I will collect them and pass them on to Michiel in the Q&A session, which will happen at the end of the launch. So yeah, if you have a burning question about writing or, you know, where he gets his ideas from or how to publish my book or why this character said that or why another character did something else, then, you know, just leave all those questions and we'll have a good old chinwag debate at the end of the discussion. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Finuala for the conversation. Enjoy.
Thanks. I want to begin, Michiel, with the compliments of the season of Wales. I mean, it's a marvelous book. It's funny. It's so tightly plotted. It's thought-provoking. It's a page turner in the sense we get quite involved with Margaret and quite worried about what she's getting herself into. But it's also a page lingerer in the sense that there are these wonderful quotable quotes and lovely satirical conversations. And at the same time, I'm sure that you are already working on another novel. And what interests me, and my first question is, how does a writer like, especially one like you who has so many books behind them, how do you cross the bridge to the next novel? I mean, I remember the two of us sitting, was it 2 years ago, in a real bookshop discussing I Am Pandarus, you know, those lovely times. Real people used to come up afterwards and have their book signed. And I was thinking it's such a different book from I Am Pandarus, and I wondered what attracted you to this new material. Was it the enclave of Hermanus? Was it Margaret's character? Was it the modernness of your characters who can self-identify as whatever they like, or was it indeed the classic Jane Austen opening that you borrowed? So what led you across the bridge?
I wasn't led as much as pushed by my publisher, because when I gave him as my last novel, the Pandarus, which was set in ancient Troy, he said, fine, we'll publish this, but the next one has to be contemporary and it has to be local. So that is, so I said, how local can I get? And I didn't want to write about Somerset West, which is where I live. And I thought, well, write about what you know. I happen to know Hermanus. So Hermanus sort of suggested itself. But then again, I've told the story a number of times. I had people visiting me, and they went off to Hermanus for the day, and they came back and they had been wanting to see whales. They didn't see any, but they said that they met this old gentleman on the cliff path who said, "Oh, it's a poor season for whales." And we thought it was funny and also thought it would be a good title for a novel. So I started literally with a title. I mean, this is the first time I've ever built a novel around a title. And that is where it started. I'm not quite sure where Margaret came from. I said, well, okay, Hermanus, people retire to Hermanus. And somehow Margaret suggested herself. I couldn't tell you why. Perhaps is it the first, certainly had women at the center of my novels before, but this is the first time I perhaps have a sort of 55-year-old woman at the center of my novel. I don't know. So...
I want to ask you more about Margaret, or ask you to tell us more about Margaret. And she is, you begin, you've got an epigraph that comes from Jane Austen, and you begin with your preamble is a take on the opening of Emma, the novel Emma. And so I think Margaret is like a Jane Austen heroine, or like any good heroine. She is interesting but flawed, a bit flawed in what does Jimmy say about her? She's not a great sharer, and I think that's true in lots of ways. And she's trying to be solitary. I mean, I really identified with Margaret's absolutely abortive attempts to live a completely solitary life. You know, and that also speaks to another one of your epigraphs from Henry James. But tell us about Margaret. Tell us about her kitchen. I had to ask my sister how you pronounce this kind of kitchen, the Mila kitchen, and her relationship, I think, she reads Jane Austen herself. Her relationship to those lovely Jane Austen heroine sisters, not just Emma, but also to Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility.
Yes. Heavens, Finuala, I don't know. You must know yourself. You're a novelist. Where do your characters come from? You base them partly on people you know. In this instance, not very much. I think my friends will be relieved to hear that I didn't paint portraits of them, and that such flaws as Margaret does have are not derived from those of my friends. I don't know. I really started... Remember, well, since we're talking about Henry James, he says about the Portrait of a Lady, I started with the idea of a single young woman affronting her destiny. Well, perhaps I started with the idea of a middle-aged woman affronting her destiny and built it around that. He says he then had only this central idea of a woman, and then he had to create a life for her. Yeah. And I think that's what I did with Margaret. I had Hermanus. She had to have a dog. Because my characters always have dogs. And the dog, this is not much of a spoiler, but he turns into a major character in the novel, as my dogs tend to do. So having a woman and a dog, and she's living on the cliff path. My first scene, she's walking on the cliff path, and her dog, Benji, jumps off a rock, chasing a dussie, and there he's stuck. I mean, I literally said to myself, well, Margaret is taking a walk. Who is she going to meet on this walk? And, I don't want to say the muse breathed into my ear or anything like that. But Jimmy turned up. There he was standing next to her. And then, of course, he becomes the secondary character. I think I often work like that. I remember the one set in Italy. I started, yes, he's on Stansted Airport. Who does he see? And I described two people he sees, a man called Cedric and an older man. I didn't know who on earth they were. I had to create lives for them. And then they became the secondary characters in the novel. I think that's probably how I go about it, is sort of set things in motion, create a character. And I mean, it sounds corny when I say you see what the character does. Obviously, the character does what you tell him or her to do, except it's not quite as simple as that either. I mean, you must also know that once, you don't want to say they have a will of their own, but they certainly seem to, yeah, they have a sort of, they do things and they say things, and that leads you on to the next. So this novel, probably more so than any other, because as I say, I started with a blank canvas. I started with a title. With many of the other novels, obviously the one on Henry James, I started with a whole backstory, with a lot of research. And I wrote one about bodies politic, the Pandarus. I did a lot of research. So there, things were set out for me to a large extent. And in a way, that is more difficult because you now have to conform to a preset matrix. Whereas here, I mean, this was actually great fun writing this novel because I could invent anything. I mean, within reason. I mean, that who's going to come along next? And in fact, the Jane Austen also was not planned. I mean, the epigraph from Emma I wrote after I finished the novel. I just thought that's it seemed appropriate. And I suppose Jane Austen is in my DNA, whenever, as is Henry James, and they just, you know, crop up without my actually intending them to. So that's really how Jane Austen came into the novel. I didn't start with her at all. I wouldn't even say I envisaged Margaret as a Jane Austen-y character. I mean, Jane Austen wouldn't have written about a 55-year-old woman. You know, she'd have written about a marriageable woman and about the love affair that leads to marriage. This is a woman who is divorced. What?
I do think it's. I think you've managed to write a Jane Austen novel with sex in it, and I commend you for it. In many ways, your style is so Jane Austen-esque. And yet Margaret is confronting very modern desires and things that are expressed in modern novels. And it was such a success. But I'm just going to slightly, I mean, Jane Austen is the patron saint of our kind of satire. And I earlier today, I sent you a passage I wanted you to read for us this evening. And just to say that I think it's a dinner party scene, which is always a classic satirical material, isn't it? I mean, what other reason would we writers go out for other than to take notes at conversations?
Well, Henry James based all his novels on stories he'd heard, not all his novels, but many of his novels on stories he'd heard at dinner parties. Yeah, so,
yeah, and I just, what I want to say about this scene, maybe you'll think, why did I choose such a light scene? But I chose it because I was at dinner the other evening, but with my South African sisters here, and I found myself telling them your scene. I found myself enjoying telling them about it, and both of them just said, "Oh, that's marvelous! Oh, that's so funny! What a funny idea!" So I wanted you to read it and just maybe tell our audience a little bit about the context. You're going to read the part where the dinner party guests disagree about something, but they've actually agreed about something before that.
Yes, yeah. They talked about all the usual things, Jacob Zuma, Brexit, all these things, and of course they all agree. You know, they are middle-class South Africans, you know, middle-class white South Africans.
Yeah.
So should I carry on from there? Will you?
Yeah.
So there is this dinner party. No one knows. They're all strange. They've been to each other. The hostess has just assembled a group of people who happen to be in Hermanus at the time. So So they haven't met each other before, and they sort of feeling their way as one does. I should just also explain that there are two men, Keith and Christa, and Margaret doesn't know who is who. I mean, so that explains why there are sort of double references to Keith and Christa. So we start with Marge. Marge is the hostess. But Marge, ever the attentive hostess, chipped in with, Philip has a really lovely beach cottage on Grotto, but during the week he lawyers in Swellendam. Philip nodded gravely, as if reluctantly admitting to a minor misdemeanor. And Christo, or Keith, started reminiscing about a wonderful weekend they'd spent in Swellendam, except it turned out, with polite prompting from Keith or Christo, to have been Montague, which Chris and Cindy pronounced to be equally delightful. Philip crushed the meringue of his pavlova with emphatic gravitas and said, "Actually, I think Montague is a dump." This was so unexpected that Margaret uttered a yelp of laughter before she could stop herself. Chris said, clearly offended, "Well, we loved it, didn't we, darling?" And Cindy said, "Oh, yes, isn't that where we had those divine chicken pies?" "No, I think that was Barrydale, darling," said Chris. "In Montague, we had lamb curry." "No, that was Barrydale, lovey," said Cindy. "I remember because it said a Barrydale speciality on the menu." "Oh, yes," said Christo, or perhaps Keith. "We've had the lamb curry in Barrydale, haven't we, Keith?" "Aha, Keith." "Was that Barrydale?" asked Keith, as Margaret now knew. "I thought it was Lady Smith." "No, Keith," said Christo, with a light laugh over a simmering irritation. "It was definitely Barrydale." "Well, since you're so definite, I suppose it was Barrydale. Except," he added in a stage whisper to the company at large, a hand theatrically covering his mouth, "I still think it was Lady Smith." Margaret found it odd that a group of people could, without much fuss, reach unanimity on matters of national and international importance, and then disagree passionately about chicken pies and lamb curry. "In any case," she said to Philip, "I think we've established that you live in Swellendam."
I'm not sure how you'll feel about this question, but it's something that troubles me with satire, that a scene like that is a scene we can write and it will be acceptable to the world. But do you feel now, as a satirical writer, as a writer in not just in South Africa, but in the world itself, the way it's moving towards a kind of mandatory humorlessness, where so much new censorship is entering, do you question yourself as you're writing about how will this be interpreted by the thought police?
I would say generally no. I mean, I think my answer comes in two parts. Firstly, it's interesting that the crises we have at the moment, especially the pandemic, has produced so much humor. I mean, that really there's so many jokes. And of course, another great source of humor is Donald Trump. You know, I mean, these absolute disasters. And I suppose that is a natural human instinct, is we defend ourselves against this awful reality by making jokes about it. I mean, and in plagues, people make jokes about death. You know, people are making jokes about death. So that's part one of the answer. I think that if we talk of the thought police in South Africa, one has, of course, to be very careful. I mean, that there are certain areas where humor is not allowed to go. I think people are pushing the boundaries even there, but you know, for heaven's sake, don't tweet, because you can unleash an absolute barrage of criticism. So yeah, you do watch that you don't say anything terribly insensitive, and I think that's probably a good thing. There have been eras of history, I think, where people have relished, being offensive, but I think people have become very touchy. Perhaps especially in America, that you just make a slightly off joke, and boy, there it goes. On the other hand, late night TV, they don't care what they say. Although I suspect even there are certain no-go areas. Okay, Donald Trump is fair game, but you can't make jokes about Black Lives Matter, for instance. Who would want to? But I'm just saying that there are certain areas that you steer clear of. So, but I think that.
No, I mean, carry on. Sorry, finish what you were saying.
I think my satire remains fairly safe. I mean, I'm not really tempted to be outrageous, so, so you have a dinner party, you make fun of people at a dinner party. That's not really terribly brave or anything.
I think this brings me to Jimmy and the miracle of Jimmy coming into your narrative. You say you have Margaret walking along the cliff path, and who is she going to encounter? And it happens to be Jimmy Prinsloo Mazibuko, who is the product of an ANC politician and an Afrikaans woman who's seen the light or seen her own light. Yeah. Yes. And he's a fascinating character, and there's almost like a dance between the two of them. And there's Margaret really wanting to live this life of solitude, and there's Jimmy refusing, but also Margaret being very reticent, very white South African liberal in her concerns, and Jimmy challenges her. I mean, Jimmy does say things that are quite audacious.
Well, he can, because he has an ANC father and an Afrikaans mother, so he can say almost anything.
Yeah, he's got license. And I'm interested in my own reactions reading his character when Jimmy, who is this racial mixed character, and he sort of inveigles his way into her house and uses her shower before they really have any kind of relationship, and he seems to be taking over her space, and then he starts staring at her alarm system, and I think, Margaret, watch out. I mean, this man. And so you the reader, you get caught out with your prejudices. So I just wanted you to talk a bit more about Jimmy. Was he a miracle? How did you deal with a character who did things that are quite offensive, and yet at the same time you keep the reader not against him? You string it out wonderfully. I mean, as the blurb says, it's a psychological drama. This give and take of Jimmy's personality. Is it because he's young that he gets away with things?
Does he get away with things? I know some people have said they just find him irritating, because I did write him as rather irritating. He deliberately needles Margaret. So I wanted a challenging character, and because of his background, he can be challenging on all fronts. He can confront her with the fact, you are a white middle-class middle-aged woman with your kitchen and your dog. So he can confront her like that. So he's, I suppose, I mean, one could say he's a useful character in that he doesn't have to have those boundaries. He can he's a shapeshifter, isn't he? So he is, he adjusts himself to whatever audience he has. And I think that was to me the interest in his relationship with Margaret, is how he challenges her. She is offended, she's irritated. I had to scrap any number of occurrences of the word irritated. I discovered how often I'd use it, because she's irritated with him all the time. But irritation is a form of stimulation, I suppose. And so, yes, he could make comments about the racial situation, which a white character would probably be more careful about making. So he was useful from that point of view. Yes, I could use him in lots of different ways. And to be honest, when he appeared, I didn't know what on earth he was all about. I don't know why I decided he had to be of mixed race, perhaps because it gave me more options. And then I thought, let's see. I mean, when he looks at the burglar alarm, I didn't know, whether he was interested for the reasons that we think, or why. It was another fun aspect of this novel, is that I didn't really know how it was going to turn out. I mean, until very late in the novel. And that's why I put in, well, this is not a spoiler because it's in the preamble where I have the line about it was not to be foreseen that in her 56th year she would kill a man with a kitchen knife. I mean, that is really just to set the reader up. But I mean, I didn't know that when I started writing the novel that she was going to kill a man with a kitchen knife. That happened. And so...
Well, I love your knives. I mean, your writing is so economical. I mean, if there's a knife or a painting or a bowl of ice cream in Michiel's book, then that knife, bowl of ice cream, painting is going to be domain. And it has a double twist at the end I loved. But just to stay a bit with Jimmy and Margaret, for you, was the kind of, when you look at it afterwards or while you were working on it, was your sense of the theme of the novel an exploration of solitude versus society, or was it about truth? Because the two of them seem to have very different views of truth. And I don't take it entirely amiss, Michiel, that you seem to align poets with a lack of truth in your novel. Because Jimmy,
do I? I wonder. Yeah, it's because that's interesting. In the novel I'm writing at the moment, someone says to my main character, "What do you believe in?" And he says, "I believe in poetry." So I'm making a towards poets. Yes, you've put your finger on two main themes that emerged. One is, well, as the Henry James quote says, can one ever be just a pure character without any appurtenances, as James puts it? He said, well, his character says everybody is a sum of everything surrounding him or her. So that was one theme that I started with, say, a kind of laboratory experiment. Take a woman who decides she wants to cut ties with her old life, place her there in this laboratory and see what happens to her. So that was one of the drivers of the novel. Truth emerged as a theme just because Jimmy is so mysterious and you never know whether he's telling the truth. So that became a major aspect. And Jimmy, of course, has very original views on truth. I mean, that to him, perhaps it's the alternative truth that Donald Trump has made famous. But so those two themes sort of played off against each other in the novel.
Yeah. And just one last question before we go to what our audience's questions might be. The title of the novel, obviously you said it came to you, it was given unto you by
by an angel,
a Hermanus resident. But then I was thinking about how it really works for you in the sense of the title being like a hint to the reader. Don't come to Hermanus and expect to see whales. I'm going to give you something else, perhaps. But also a season, that this is a very tightly compressed novel in terms of time. And I wondered if that was part of your pleasure. I mean, you've spoken about the pleasure of writing this book, the discovery, the joy, and whether giving yourself that tight time frame from, I think it's the 10th of November till the 7th of January the next year.
Yes.
I wondered whether perhaps you had written the novel in a similar time frame, which would be very athletic of you, but whether that was a helpful and satisfying way of proceeding, knowing that each chapter was a day.
Yes, I sort of drifted into it. I did. I don't want to say I wrote it in real time. I certainly didn't write this novel in 10 days or 2 months or whatever. But I did keep track of, what was likely to happen on such and such a day. So I did keep Jane Austen apparently also wrote her novels with her, a calendar next to her. So that's not why I did it, but I thought, yes. I mean, I suppose I'm really just thinking, off the top of my head now, but I suppose also because I didn't really have a predetermined scheme, that I thought, let's take this novel one day at a time and see what happens. I can't now predict what's going to happen in 6 months' time. I think you need to have a different kind of imagination. If you're going to make a novel span 5 years, you have to plan in terms of, I suppose, come to think of it, it's probably quite lazy. You say, okay, I'll just take it one day at a time and see what happens. And that is what happened. So.
Well, it's wonderful. It's very like a stage drama, and I really was gripped, there's some books you have to read because they're like a chore or something, because everyone tells you must read this. But your book was just such a pleasure to read, and then to read again in preparation for this interview. So,
well, thank you. Yeah. Well, I just want to say I also really enjoyed your book. So this is where we also give. It's also wonderfully entertaining, wonderfully, quite acerbic. I mean, the Adamastor University is probably not terribly pleased about what you did to them. But anyway, so yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I'm pleased you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for, being prepared to ask me.
By the way, when one of your characters mentions that he's read a novel set in Italy, and a South African goes to Italy, is that character talking about your book? Or
he's talking about one of my books. Alfred Hitchcock always appeared briefly in all his movies. Now that's my Hitchcock moment when I appear in my own novel. Is this novel that this person is reading? Yeah.
But I mean, I just think one last thing is that what everybody will recognize reading this book is the way you want to be alone, and then it's Christmas and everyone phones you and descends on you. I mean, I think that's just absolutely marvelous.
Yeah. Well, I think we will have gathered that I'm skeptical of family Christmases, and so I created. As one review said, the Christmas from Hell is in my novel too.
It's an absolute delight to read, and that chiming clock made me think that you must have had one.
I'm not quite sure where the chiming clock came from. It's another one of these weird things, that. Because there are two clocks, of course. There's the one that gets crashed by someone descending a staircase very fast, and then there's one in the bedroom. I don't know. There's no particular significance. I'm sure my psychologist friends would tell us why this clock becomes such a menacing feature in the novel.
Yeah. Well, I think we can invite Jennifer back to talk about the questions.
Hello, I have returned. Can you hear me?
Hi, Jennifer. Hi.
Cool. We've got a few comments and questions. We've got some greetings that I'd like to just share. Isabel Dixon says,
hi,
hello.
Isabel.
From Cambridge, England. Lovely to see you all. Stefanus Miller says, goeienaand Michiel, dit is so lekker om vanaand na jou te luister. Sorry.
Hi, Stefanus.
Hi. Hazel Woodward says, local is just perfect.
Hi, Hazel. Yeah.
Christine Coates says, hello from Hermanus, where it's a poor season for everyone, not only Wales.
Okay.
And then Lisa says, I look forward to reading this and to hear Simon barking in the background.
Yeah, Lisa knows Simon very well. She also walks in the park. So, hi, Lisa.
I think, that the first question is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but I mean, this is, Jonathan Answer says, is that Benji that we can hear?
No, this is Simon, but, I changed the name so to protect him from, malicious people. He's actually Benji, although he hasn't actually, I don't want to drop any more spoilers, but he hasn't done everything that Benji has done. Yeah. Hi, Jonathan. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see your avatar. Here's a question from Tace, who says, it's taking up the whole screen. You'll have to step up to see.
Yes. Yes, it's interesting that you mention Ingrid's book. Ingrid is a friend of mine, and we were just talking it one day, and she said, oh, she's writing this novel about Wales. And I said, no, you're not, because I also am. So we were writing the novels about Wales at the same time. Ingrid's appeared before mine, and I was worried. No, you don't want, perhaps she's now, sort of cornered the market on Wales. But I decided, no, they dissimilar enough. But it is just interesting that we just happen both to be writing. I suppose whales are quite fashionable at the moment. I don't know, but it just so happened. It was just a coincidence. So yeah, that's that's the link. Echoes or whispers? I don't think so, because Ingrid's book appeared long before mine, but I'd already basically completed my novel by then, so I wasn't influenced in writing my novel by Ingrid's wonderful description. I'm pleased that I hadn't read Ingrid's description, because it would have been very seductive.
Interesting coincidence. Let me see what else we have. We have a comment from Helen Moffat. She says she can't wait to read the book. A lot of people have said they can't wait to read the book. Robin Spacey says she's put it at the top of her to be read pile.
Great, thanks.
Andy Miller says, on the subject of humour and on a complete tangent, I've always wanted to tell you how much I loved your essay in Stephen Watson's collection, The City Imagined, years ago. That scene on the escalators outside Studderford's wonderful.
Well, yes, thanks very much. I'm pleased someone enjoyed it. My sister removed Stephen Watson's book from their library because she was afraid her friends would read it and identify her brother, because it's actually quite a revealing, what happens on the escalators outside Studderford's. But I'm pleased, Andy, that you enjoyed it.
The memories of
Studderford.
Yeah. Gail says, I am in awe of your writing, Michiel. This one is top of my list for June.
Thanks, Gail.
Tay says, a more general follow-up question. To what extent is your own creative writing influenced by the literary translations you do, if at all?
Tay, I think not at all. Of course, you're never conscious of these things. I mean, there's so many unconscious things. I think that there's a fairly clear division in my mind between the translations I do and between my own writing. I think, for instance, I hope my translations are not too much influenced by my own writing style. I try to adapt to the writer's style. And by the same token, I hope that in my writing, I'm not too much influenced by what I'm translating. Of course, there are influences all the time, and you can't really resist them. I'm influenced by every single book I've ever read, but I'm certainly not conscious of a direct influence. I think, oddly, perhaps most of the books I've translated, with the possible exception of Ingrid's, have been rather different to my own writing. I mean, the last novel I translated is Red Dog by Wilma Anker. Now, I could never write anything like Red Dog. It's an absolutely wonderful novel, but it goes into areas that I just never would dare go. I mean, quite physically, but also intellectually. Yeah. So yes, I don't think there's too much of a crossover.
I think, yeah, I've heard a lot of sort of bilingual people say that writing in one language is different to writing in another. You get a different sort of vibe from your native tongue and the tongue that you learned later on. Do you find that?
Yes, I think so. It's one of the difficulties of translation is you are entering probably a different way of looking at things, and you have to translate into another one, and you don't want to lose the distance, and yet you also want to be you also want to be true to the language you translate into, but also to the novel that you're translating. I think that's really the problem with translation.
We've got some shout outs from the people at Jonathan Ball Publishers. Kelly says,
hi, Kelly. Thanks.
And Jeremy says, hello, Michiel and Finuala. Lovely discussion. Thanks so much. So it's nice to see.
Thanks, Jeremy. I hope you got the mention of you who forced me to write this novel.
Let me just see what else we have. We have, sorry, let me just get my bearings here. Stephanus says, Michiel, I've not yet read the novel, but I'm sure he's buying the ebook as we speak. I look forward to doing so, but perhaps more generally, how do you sustain the writerly life, the meaning of it in times so extraordinary?
Of course, from a practical point of view, it's an ideal time for writers because you're stuck in front of a computer with nothing else to do. So from that point of view, it's ideal. But you clearly are hinting at something a bit more profound when you say the writerly life, the meaning of it in times so extraordinary. I mean, after all, you can't carry on writing novels about sitting in a room writing a novel. You need to, have some experience, and in that way, yeah. Well, it's as always the imagination. You imagine what it would be like not to be sitting in your room locked down. In that sense, writing is very satisfying. I don't know, Finuala, you probably feel that too, that you are escaping the lockdown by writing. Or is that not your experience?
Yeah, no, it's a completely rich experience. And it actually makes the book you're working on even bigger, a bigger world, because your own world has become so reduced.
Yeah, no, I think so.
I'm not sure if you saw Kate Nick's column in the Sunday Times, but she was saying she's having trouble imagining or figuring out how to situate the work the writing that she's doing now for future novels. Will those people be hugging each other hello? And I think she said, or someone said the novel they're writing now they're setting it last year, but for the next novel, they're not quite sure how they're going to handle our future world. Are you guys feeling those kinds of?
Yes, perhaps we'll all be writing historical novels about the days when people could still hug, and I don't know. I don't know. The imagination is infinitely ingenious and will probably discover ways of writing novels about people in lockdown.
Yeah.
After all, we know Boccaccia's Decameron was set in the plague when people started telling each other stories. So perhaps we'll have that.
Yeah. Finuala, are you working on a novel at the moment?
Yeah, I am. It is mostly historical, but it has a contemporary aspect. And then that's working for me, what I had set up contemporary-wise. And then lockdown happened, and then I had this kind of insight into how lockdown could help my contemporary characters. So I'm afraid, yeah, I'm using it.
Are you using it? Okay.
Yeah. I'm not in any kind of. I'm not ostentatious,
Has there been I'm sure someone has already published a lockdown novel. I mean, I know it takes forever for a novel to be published, but
well, I heard a discussion on the Times Literary Supplement podcast, and the editor saying, "I'm not looking forward to all these lockdown novels that are going to come," and I thought it was a bit unfair of him.
It is rather, because there goes 20,000 people heave a sigh and say, "Oh Lord, I'm writing a lockdown novel."
Melinda Ferguson has published 2 collections of essays written by South Africans during lockdown as ebooks.
Okay.
They're called the Lockdown Chronicles, I think. So there's 2, but that's nonfiction, obviously. And then I heard, I don't know if it's on the theme of lockdown, but Zadie Smith has written an entire collection of essays during lockdown too, which is getting published in August, which is putting us, the rest of us that just watched Netflix the whole time, making us look very bad.
Well, I've been lockdown poems from my various locked down poet friends and colleagues and students, and there's some great stuff. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Are you planning on publishing it?
No, I don't publish.
Oh no, but I mean, you could gather that as a collection.
Yeah, I mean, if there was somebody in the group who wanted to drive it, yes, yeah.
Sounds good. There's a fantastic movie called Unfriended, which was out a few years ago, which is totally filmed on Skype, and it's a really scary horror movie, and it actually works really well. So I mean, you can use these dreadful tools of technology to make great art. We've got a comment from Maya Sutherland, who says, well, Maya Fowler Sutherland, who says, thank you, Finuala and Michiel. This has been an unexpected gift of COVID. I'm watching from British Columbia.
Hi,
Which is
Maya.
nice.
Hi, Maya.
And Donald says, always a pleasure to listen to the two of you. Novel sounds like a brilliant read. I'll be buying it tomorrow. Thank you for a wonderful discussion.
Thanks, Anne. We miss you.
Cecily says, I loved it too. Sorry to end, but very satisfying.
Thanks, Cecily.
Sandra, this worked well. Looking forward to reading it. Like Ingrid's Wales, but I'm sure there is space for many different books on Wales.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Sandra.
Christine reminds us that Zexendar wrote The Whale Caller in Hermanus. Set in
Yes,
Hermanus.
I thought of that. To be honest, I'd never read that, and I'm again pleased I didn't, because you don't want to be influenced. So I wasn't. Yeah.
Slipper would like to know what wine you're drinking, Michiel.
Ah, yes, this is a plug for Finuala and I are drinking the same wine, Philip Myburg, whom not Finuala, sorry, Jennifer, you and I are drinking the same wine. We had an interview with Philip Myburg, who makes this delightful wine, and we both drinking Justenberg. Yeah.
Delicious. It's going down a treat. Lars says, so where did the advice that sharp knives are the only knives to have come from?
Yes. Well, I think, Lars, as you probably know, because you identified sort of the source of my character, Jimmy, and it was the source of the character, Jimmy, who gave me the advice about sharp knives. He also gave me the advice that you don't put sharp knives into dishwashers. You leave them outside, which, of course, becomes a plot point in this novel. So
Maya says, when it comes to international reception of your work, do you ever feel your South African-based work are or might be misunderstood? Does that change the way you approach writing a novel?
Well, Maya, I don't think any of my South African-based works has been really published overseas. Yes, the Lost Ground was published in France. I'm pretty sure much of it must be misunderstood. I mean, how do you try? Because Lost Ground was based in the little Karoo. I can't imagine what a French audience would have made of that. But I think we also adjust. You know, we read novels about Lithuania or whatever, and we sort of adjust. And I'm sure we get a lot of things wrong, but I suppose people feel they get enough. It doesn't change the way I approach a novel. I don't write a novel thinking, oh, well, this is going to be read in Lithuania. I'd better make provision for that. I don't even make provision for a British or an American reader because, how can one tell who's going to be reading it?
Good. You shouldn't. And you shouldn't have to.
Well, it's a very interesting question, but yeah.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to enter into the world of A Poor Season for Wales. Oh, and here we have Ingrid Winterbach.
Ingrid, hi, the other whale caller. Right.
Fantastic. And Isabel says, enough whales to go around for every season and writer, which I'm sure is true. But,
great.
Yeah. And that's all the questions we have at the moment. I'm not sure if you have anywhere else you wanted to go, Finuala, with the discussion, or?
No, I think I can hear Michiel's dog snoring.
No, he's not snoring. He's grunting. He's standing next to me, and he's basically saying, "What?" I'm giving him the mic now. He doesn't know what on earth I'm doing. I mean, here I am jabbering at a little screen.
Hey. He thinks you're talking to him.
No, he knows I'm not, which is why he's complaining.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think we had some lovely questions from the audience, which is nice to see. We don't always get such engaged audience members, virtual audience members. So that was lovely. Thank you so much, Finuala, for a lovely conversation, some great questions, and thanks, Michiel, for giving us your time to discuss your wonderful book.
Well, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks so much for giving me the time. And thanks, Finuala, I mean, for reading my book twice, you know, wow. You know, I'm really, so thanks very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks,
and
Jenny.
thank you to Jonathan Ball for, thanks to Jonathan Ball for publishing the book and organizing with you guys. And thanks to everyone for watching.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Night.